Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're embarking on a journey, really getting into the remarkable and, well, often surprising world of an undeniable American icon,
Mhm.
a figure whose image is just etched into the very fabric of Hollywood. But, beyond that silver screen persona, his personal story, his public stances, they're far more complex, maybe even surprising than you might imagine.
That's absolutely right. This isn't just a chronological list of movies or something.
No.
We're really exploring the evolution of a man who became this symbol, often larger than life, a representation of certain American ideals, but also someone who definitely sparked considerable contention.
So we'll delve into his extraordinary career, his private world, and those powerful, sometimes polarizing views that shaped his lasting impact.
Exactly.
Let's begin right at the start, because the man we all know as John Wayne, well, he wasn't born John Wayne.
No, he wasn't. He came into the world as Marion Robert Morrison, Winterset, Iowa, May 26, 1907.
And the nickname Duke, that wasn't some Hollywood invention either, was it?
Not at all. It actually came from his childhood dog, an Airedale Terrier, back when they lived in Glendale, California. Apparently, he just preferred Duke to Marion, and, well, it stuck.
It's funny how those small things happen.
It really is. And what's striking is how these early influences, even things that seem minor, can sort of lay the groundwork for a public persona later on.
Right.
Marion wasn't, born this tough guy. He was actually gifted academically, athletically, too, at Glendale Union High. Excelled in football, even debate.
Debate. Interesting. Paints a different picture, doesn't it? Before Hollywood really took hold.
Completely. But then came this major pivot point right after high school. He got a football scholarship to USC, University of Southern California.
Yeah.
But then a body surfing accident, broken collarbone.
Ouch.
Yeah. And the story goes he was so afraid of his coach finding out the real reason, he didn't admit it. And that injury ultimately cost him the scholarship. He had to leave USC.
Wow. So that's how he ended up drifting towards Hollywood.
Pretty much. That's the unlikely entry. His former coach had connections. And, as a favor, Wayne landed a job as a prop boy for Fox Film Corporation.
Okay.
And here's where it gets really fascinating, I think. He actually got to know Wyatt Earp.
The Wyatt Earp? The lawman.
The very same. Earp was friends with the silent film star Tom Mix, and Wayne later credited Earp with influencing his walk, his talk, his whole screen persona.
That's incredible. The real Wyatt Earp shaping the future John Wayne.
Isn't it? So he's there, a prop boy, soaking it all in, and then comes the moment his screen name is basically invented for him.
Ah, yes. How did John Wayne come about?
Director Raoul Walsh. He spotted Wayne moving studio furniture, just liked his look, and decided to cast him in his first lead role. This was a 1930 Western, The Big Trail.
Okay.
Walsh first suggested Anthony Wayne, after the Revolutionary War general. But the studio head apparently thought it sounded too Italian.
Seriously? Too Italian?
That's the story. So they decided on John Wayne, and Wayne himself wasn't even there for the conversation.
He just found out later.
Apparently so. And his pay jumped to $105 a week, which back then was a pretty huge deal.
I'll bet. And the big trail itself. That was something special, technically, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. A really compelling footnote in film history. It was an early widescreen epic filmed in this revolutionary 70mm grandeur process. A real technological marvel for 1930.
But it didn't do well.
No, it was ambitious, cost over $2 million, but it was a box office failure. Mainly because only a handful of theaters were even equipped to show it on widescreen.
Ah, bad timing.
Exactly. And that failure forced him back into almost a decade of low-budget westerns. The B-movies.
Right, that period often gets glossed over.
But it was crucial. That's where he really honed his craft. He made something like 80 of these films, often for places like Monogram Pictures.
80 films, that's relentless.
It really was. He even briefly became one of the first singing cowboys in Riders of Destiny, though his singing was dubbed.
Huh. Probably wise.
Probably. But it was during this B-movie grind that he developed that really distinctive, gritty fighting style with the legendary stuntman Yakima Canutt.
Oh, yeah. Tell us about that.
Well, standard practice then was the good guy always fought clean. But Wayne and Canutt developed this style where the hero would fight dirty if needed, do whatever it took to win. It was a real departure and influenced countless westerns afterwards.
That makes sense for his persona. All that grit finally paid off, though.
It did. With John Ford's Stagecoach in 1939, that was the breakthrough.
Finally. But Ford had trouble getting it made with Wayne in the lead, right?
Yeah, because of that B-movie reputation, Ford really had to fight for him. In the end, the bigger star, Claire Trevor, actually got top billing.
Still, the film was huge.
Massive.
Yeah.
Critically, financially, it undeniably catapulted Wayne into mainstream stardom. It really speaks to perseverance, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Okay, so he's finally a star, and then World War II. That's another complicated part of his story.
Very complicated. He was 34 at the time of Pearl Harbor. He had a family, children, so he received a family deferment, classified 3A.
But did he want to serve?
He expressed that desire, yeah. He wrote to John Ford about wanting to enlist. He later applied to the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services. But his attempts weren't successful. And Republic Studios, where he was basically their only A-list star under contract, they adamantly refused to release him.
They wouldn't let him go.
They even threatened him with a lawsuit if he broke his contract to enlist. It put him in a difficult position.
So he didn't serve in the military itself?
No, but he did contribute significantly in other ways. He did USO tours, spent 3 months in 1943 and 44 visiting bases and hospitals in the South Pacific.
Okay.
And during that trip, the head of the OSS actually asked him to assess General Douglas MacArthur, sort of an informal intelligence gathering.
Wow. That's unexpected.
It is.
Oh.
And his widow later suggested that his really intense patriotism in later years was partly him kind of atoning for staying home during the war. A complex personal angle.
That adds another layer. His career just kept rolling through the 40s and 50s, though.
Oh, incredibly prolific. His first color film was The Shepherd of the Hills in 41. In 42, he worked with Cecil B. DeMille for the only time in Reek the Wild Wind, playing a rare character with, let's say, questionable values.
A bit of a departure.
And he even starred in his own radio adventure series for 6 months in 42. 3 Sheets to the Wind. Played an international spy.
Radio spy, and then came those truly iconic roles.
Absolutely. You think of Red River in 48, The Quiet Man in 52.
Love The Quiet Man.
Great film, where he says he's 6'4.5". And of course, The Searchers in 1956.
Often called his best performance, right? Most complex.
Definitely. And where he first uses that line, Pilgrim. He also started his own production company around then, Batjack.
Batjack. Odd name.
Named after a fictional shipping company in one of his films, Wake of the Red Witch. Apparently his secretary misspelled it, and it just stuck.
Another happy accident. It's interesting, too, the major roles he didn't take.
Yeah, that's quite telling. He turned down All the King's Men in 49. Found the script un-American.
And Broderick Crawford won the Oscar for that, beating Wayne, who was nominated for Sands of Iwo Jima.
Exactly. He also refused High Noon in 52. He saw it as an allegory against the Hollywood blacklist, which he actually supported. So that was a political stance.
And later on.
Well, later he was considered too old for Dirty Harry in 71. And famously, he declined the Waco Kid role in Mel Brooks's Blazing Saddles.
Why Blazing Saddles?
He reportedly found the dialogue too dirty for his image, but he told Brooks he'd be first in line to see it. These choices really show his personal values beyond just the acting roles themselves.
Definitely. Okay, let's shift a bit beyond the camera. His personal life seems just as eventful, sometimes really contrasting with that tough guy image.
Oh, for sure. 3 marriages, 2 divorces, 7 children in total. And several of his kids, Michael, Patrick, Ethan, followed him into the business. Even his granddaughter, Jennifer Wayne, from the country group Runaway June.
It runs in the family. But the marriages weren't always smooth sailing, were they?
Not remotely. There are some really intense stories. His second wife, Esperanza Barr, a Mexican actress, was known for being quite tempestuous.
I think I've heard this one.
Yeah, the famous story is after he came home late from the rap party for Angel and the Bad Man, she was apparently in a drunken rage and actually tried to shoot him as he walked in the door.
Tried to shoot him.
Luckily,
Terrible.
she missed. He also had some high-profile affairs, one with Merle Oberon early on. And later in life, he had a long-term relationship with his secretary, Pat Stacy, who even wrote a book about it after his death.
And the hairpiece. That became pretty well known.
Yeah, by the late 40s, he was wearing one. But he had a great sense of humor about it. That famous story at Harvard when a student asked if it was real mohair.
What did he say?
He supposedly replied, "Sir, that's real hair. Not mine, but real hair."
Classic Duke.
He seemed to have this sort of philosophical humor. His friend, Congressman Alfonso Bell Jr., mentioned a quote from him, right? Something like, "Each of us is a mixture of some good and some not so good qualities. We should refrain from making judgments just because a fella happens to be a dirty, rotten SOB."
quite the outlook.
It is. And people might be surprised by his intellectual side, too. He loved literature. Dickens, Conan Doyle, Agatha Christie were favorites,
A reader?
and a keen chess player. Roger Ebert wrote about watching him play chess on the set of Chisholm, just roaring with laughter when he realized he'd trapped his own queen.
That's a great image.
There's also that surprising comment attributed to him about Rock Hudson, back when Hudson's sexuality wasn't public knowledge. Someone supposedly asked Wayne about it, and he just said, "Who the hell cares if he's a queer? The man plays great chess."
Really? That's unexpected, given his later public image.
It shows a different dimension, doesn't it? A glimpse into his private thoughts, perhaps?
Yeah. Now, his health battles were very public, a real contrast to that indestructible screen persona.
Absolutely. He was a lifelong chain smoker, diagnosed with lung cancer in 1964.
That must have been terrifying then.
Oh, hugely. He had surgery, removed his entire left lung and 2 ribs. But what was significant was that he went public with it.
Right, that wasn't common back then.
Not at all. He encouraged people to get preventive exams. He's even credited with coining the term the Big C as a sort of euphemism for cancer.
He also had issues with alcohol, didn't he?
He did. Some directors apparently called him a mean drunk, especially in the afternoons. He had that famous quote about tequila.
What was it?
Tequila makes your head hurt, not from your hangover, from falling over and hitting your head. Self-aware, at least.
Seems so. On a totally different note, he was also very active as a Freemason, a master mason, involved in the Scottish Rite, the Shrine Temple.
Lots of different facets. He even owned an island.
Yeah, for a time he owned Tabersil Island in Panama. And his yacht, the Wild Goose, is actually on the U.S. National Register of Historic Places now. It's quite a mix of details when you pull it all together. It really is. So many unexpected layers. Okay, let's dive into his political and social views. This is where his American icon persona really gets cemented for many, but also where a lot of the debate comes in.
Definitely. He was very vocally a conservative Republican and a really ardent anti-communist, especially within Hollywood.
But he wasn't always Republican.
Interestingly, no. He actually voted for FDR back in 1936. And he apparently admired President Truman, even though he later became a staunch Republican supporter.
And he was involved in that Motion Picture Alliance.
Yes, the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals. Founded in 1944, he became its president in 1949. It was very conservative, very anti-communist.
And he supported HUAC, the House Un-American Activities Committee.
Actively supported it. He even starred in a movie called Big Jim McLean in 1952, playing a HUAC investigator, specifically to show his support for their work.
That's quite a statement.
It is. And there's that really astonishing allegation. You have to take it with a grain of salt, maybe. But that Soviet leader, Joseph Stalin, despite apparently being a fan of Wayne's movies, actually wanted him assassinated because of his strong anti-communist stance.
Assassinated? By Stalin? That's wild.
It's a story that persists.
Yeah.
He certainly used his fame politically, campaigning hard for Nixon and later for Reagan.
Did he ever think of running for office himself?
He declined. He apparently joked that the public wouldn't take an actor seriously in the White House.
Yeah.
Which is ironic looking back.
A little bit, yeah. And then there was the Green Berets.
Right, 1968, he co-directed and starred in it. It really stands out because it was the only major Hollywood film made during the Vietnam War that was explicitly in support of the war effort. Reflected his very strong views.
But then there's a surprising twist regarding his politics, isn't there? Something involving Panama.
Yes, this is really fascinating. The Panama Canal Treaty in the mid-70s. Despite being such a staunch conservative, Wayne actually supported returning the canal to Panama.
That seems completely counter to his usual stance, and people like Reagan were fiercely opposed.
Exactly. But reports suggest it was because of his personal friendship with the Panamanian leader, Omar Torrijos, and also the fact that his first wife, Josephine, was of Panamanian descent. His support for that treaty actually earned him hate mail for the first time in his life.
Shows his views weren't always predictable, perhaps.
Or that personal connections sometimes outweighed ideology for him. It's complex.
Then there was that famous incident at the 1973 Oscars. Marlon Brando sashing Littlefeather.
Right. Brando refused his Best Actor Oscar for The Godfather, sending Sacheen Littlefeather to speak about the treatment of Native Americans in film and at Wounded Knee.
And Wayne's reaction, the story goes he was furious.
Littlefeather later claimed Wayne was backstage, absolutely livid, and had to be restrained by 6 security guards to stop him from physically confronting her on stage.
6 security guards? That sounds like a movie scene itself.
It does. However, It's worth noting that a recent investigation, I think in 2022, looked into it and concluded it was pretty unlikely that specific confrontation actually happened as described. So there's some debate around that dramatic account, too.
Interesting how these stories take shape. He did seem to have a sense of humor about his own politics sometimes, though.
Oh, definitely. Roger Ebert told a story about touring Wayne's house. Wayne proudly showed off photos of Republican leaders, but then in his bathroom, there was a framed photo of the Democrat Hubert Humphrey, inscribed, "With warm appreciation for your continued support."
That's fine.
And Colorado Congresswoman Pat Schroeder, a Democrat, recalled getting a silver cigarette lighter from him during the Vietnam War debates. It was engraved, "Fuck communism."
Subtle. What's also striking is the sort of grudging admiration he got from people on the opposite end of the political spectrum.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Like the left-wing activist Abby Hoffman, who said something like, "I like Wayne's wholeness, his style. As for his politics, well, I suppose even cavemen felt a little admiration for the dinosaurs that were trying to gobble them up."
That's quite a quote.
And even the avant-garde mouse filmmaker Jean-Luc Godard wrestled with it, wondering how he could hate Wayne for supporting Goldwater but love him in The Searchers. After Wayne died, a clip even surfaced where he defended Jane Fonda's right to speak her mind, despite strongly disagreeing with her views on Vietnam.
Complex figure indeed. Which brings us to probably the most difficult part of his legacy to discuss today. The controversies, especially that 1971 Playboy interview.
Yes. That interview resurfaced a few years ago in 2019 and sparked a huge amount of debate and backlash. It led to calls to rename John Wayne Airport in Orange County and to remove an exhibit dedicated to him at USC.
What were the specific comments that caused such outrage?
Well, there were several. He stated, and this is a direct quote, "I believe in white supremacy until the blacks are educated to a point of responsibility."
Wow. That's stark.
Extremely. And regarding Native Americans, he said, "Our so-called stealing of this country from them was just a matter of survival. There were great numbers of people who needed new land, and the Indians were selfishly trying to keep it for themselves."
That's a very difficult perspective to hear today.
Absolutely. He also shared views on welfare, saying things like, "Some people just won't carry their load." And he questioned what he called well-educated idiots who apologize for lazy and complaining people.
How did his family respond when this resurfaced?
His son, Ethan Wayne, defended him, saying the comments were taken out of context and that his father wasn't a racist, but perhaps a product of his time, expressing views that were more common then, however unacceptable now.
And USC, what happened with the exhibit?
Ultimately, USC decided to remove the exhibit from its main library space and move the materials into their Cinematic Arts Library archives, making them available for research, essentially. They framed it as allowing scholarship to continue on his role in film history.
It really highlights that ongoing struggle, doesn't it? How do you deal with the legacy of someone whose work is so significant, but whose personal beliefs are deeply problematic by today's standards?
It's a central question, and there are no easy answers. His political and social views are undeniably part of his story, for better or worse. But even amidst these later controversies, his film career continued strong into the 70s.
Right, he didn't just fade away. What were those later films like?
He kept working steadily. Films like Chisholm in 1970, Big Jake in 71, The Cowboys in 72. Critics still noted his presence. One called him marvelously indestructible and an almost perfect father figure in The Cowboys.
And wasn't there some funny story about the NFL draft?
Oh, yeah. In 1972, when he was 64 years old, the Atlanta Falcons actually selected him in the 17th and final round of the NFL draft. Just as a stunt, obviously.
Seriously?
Yeah. For his past football experience at USC. The pick was quickly disallowed by the commissioner, of course, but it's a fun piece of trivia.
That's amazing. His last films, though, they took on a different tone, didn't they?
They did. You had McHugh in 74 playing a modern detective, Brannigan in 75, and then his final film, his swan song, was The Shootist in 1976.
Where he plays an aging gunfighter dying of cancer.
Exactly, eerily mirroring his own health battles by that point. The film was very well received, a box office success too, and it had these interesting thematic parallels to The Gunfighter, a classic Western role he'd actually turned down decades earlier.
A fitting end to his screen career, in a way.
Many thought so. He passed away not too long after, from stomach cancer, on June 11, 1979. He was 72.
And there was talk of a religious conversion near the end.
Yes, his son Michael and grandson Matthew reported that he quietly converted to Roman Catholicism shortly before his death. His first wife and all his children were Catholic.
And his grave, it had a specific request, didn't it?
He apparently requested his tombstone read, Feo Forte Formal, which he translated as ugly, strong, and dignified.
Ugly, strong, and dignified. Interesting choice.
It is. For 20 years, his grave was actually unmarked, reportedly to prevent vandalism. Now, it has a quote on it instead. Tomorrow is the most important thing in life. Comes into us at midnight, very clean. It's perfect when it arrives, and it puts itself in our hands. It hopes we've learned something from yesterday.
That's a powerful quote. Looking back at his acting itself, how was it viewed? People had strong opinions.
They really did. Critic Charles Champlin talked about his undiminished presence even late in his career. Directors like John Ford and even the acting coach Lee Strasberg noted his natural style. Wayne himself often said he considered himself a reactor, not an actor.
Reacting honestly within the scene.
Exactly. Howard Hawks, another great director he worked with, even thought that losing a lung improved his acting because it forced natural pauses into his line delivery.
That's an interesting take.
And Gene Hackman, a phenomenal actor himself, once called Wayne one of the best actors ever. Wayne often pushed back against the idea he just played himself, pointing to roles in The Quiet Man or Sands of Iwo Jima as showing his range.
He certainly racked up the awards and honors over his long career.
An incredible number, spanning decades. He got his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame way back in 1960. In 1970, the Demolay Legion of Honor and the Golden Plate Award. In 73, the National Football Foundation gave him their gold medal. 74, inducted into the Hall of Great Western Performers at the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum.
And that Harvard Lampoon Award.
Ah, yes. 1974, the Satirical Brass Balls Award. The amazing thing is, he accepted it. He showed up on campus riding in an armored personnel carrier, faced down some protesters, and apparently received a standing ovation inside. It just perfectly captured his larger-than-life persona and his willingness to engage, even with critics.
He knew how to make an entrance. The recognition continued right to the end.
Absolutely. 1978, the Omar Bradley Spirit of Independence Award. Then, literally on his 72nd birthday in May 1979, just weeks before he died, he was awarded the Congressional Gold Medal.
That's a huge honor. Bipartisan support.
Yes, remarkably so. Robert Aldrich, who was president of the Directors Guild and politically very different from Wayne, gave this powerful statement supporting the medal, praising Wayne's courage, his dignity, his integrity, and talents as an actor. It showed the respect he commanded across divides.
And then posthumously,
in 1980, President Jimmy Carter awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor. More awards followed. The Naval Heritage Award in 98. And in 1999, the American Film Institute ranked him 13th among the greatest male screen legends of classic Hollywood.
It really solidifies that American icon status, doesn't it? Symbolizing masculinity, rugged individualism for so many people.
Undeniably. And think about this.
Yeah.
Both Japanese Emperor Hirohito in 1975 and Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev back in 1959 when they visited the U.S., both specifically requested to meet John Wayne.
Wow. Across those massive political divides.
It shows his incredible global recognition.
Yeah.
And his box office record is just unparalleled. He was on the annual Top 10 Moneymakers poll for 25 years, more than any other star.
25.
And he's the only actor to have remained on the Harris Poll of America's favorite film stars after his death, still showing up years later.
That's incredible staying power. Jem Didion wrote that famous essay, John Wayne, a love song, where she said, "He determined forever the shapes of certain of our dreams."
A beautiful line. And critic Andrew Saris saw his enduring image as this sort of displaced loner archetype, but with a kind of tragic vision of life underneath the surface.
His legacy is also literally cemented in place names.
All over. There's John Wayne Airport in Orange County, California, the John Wayne Marina up in Sequim, Washington, the John Wayne Pioneer Trail, also in Washington State, even a John Wayne Elementary School, PS 154, in Brooklyn, New York.
And the Cancer Foundation carries on his name in a really important way.
Yes, the John Wayne Cancer Foundation, started by his family in 1985, continues the fight against cancer that he began when he went public with his own illness. That's a very tangible, positive legacy.
There was also that odd legal fight with Duke University.
Oh, right, over the family wanting to market a bourbon using the name Duke. Duke University objected, naturally. The lawsuit was eventually dismissed, but it was another little ripple showing how iconic that nickname became.
His centennial year, 2007, saw big celebrations too.
Yes, especially in his birthplace, Winterset, Iowa. They had the groundbreaking for the John Wayne Birthplace Museum. And that same year, he was inducted posthumously into the California Hall of Fame by Governor Schwarzenegger.
But even with all that, the complexity remains. That attempt to create a John Wayne Day in California.
Exactly. In 2016, a proposal for an official John Wayne Day was actually voted down by the California State Assembly, primarily because lawmakers cited his controversial statements, especially those from the 1971 Playboy interview about race and Native Americans.
So even decades later, those words continue to have an impact and spark debate about how he should be remembered.
Precisely. It really brings us full circle.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what does this all mean for you, our listener? We've journeyed through this remarkable, often contradictory life. A man who truly embodied the American spirit for millions, yet whose deeply held views continue to generate friction and debate today. Maybe something to think about is, how do we as individuals, as a society, navigate these legacies? Figures whose contributions might feel immense, culturally significant, but whose personal beliefs clash pretty hard with our evolving social values.
It's a tough question. What does John Wayne's enduring presence, this powerful image that still resonates decades after his death, tell us about that complex relationship between art, celebrity, and the ever-shifting landscape of American identity?
Definitely something to ponder. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.